you're projecting that something is going to go bad, or that you're going to have a less than ideal performance, or the phone call with your friend's going to go bad, or whatever. And like with equal likelihood, you could just try to turn the tide and be like, what if it goes really well?
How long is the tour you're on? Is it crazy big?
So we've been going since June.
Yeah.
And that was like Europe, and then this is the last 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
So like it feels really good. Like obviously it's the start songs are little butterflies and stuff, but I'm like, it's a different feeling because it's like these little chunks.
It's not one big long thing? Or
it is, but it's like you'll do like, Europe was like 3 weeks, and then we came home for like 2 weeks, and then you go out for like 4 weeks, and then you come home for 2 weeks, and then you go out for 4 weeks, and then this is the last one of that. I think there've been basically 4 of those chunks.
Yeah.
And yeah, like in the middle, it's like anything else. Like in the middle, you're like, oh God.
Do you have a bunch of time off after, or do you have to immediately do all the things that piled up while you're gone?
Pretty much that. We're in about halfway through, like finishing the record.
Yeah.
And with that amount of touring, it's like once it stops, it's like full album mode and finish an album and hopefully make it an awesome 4th album.
I feel like when I was younger, I was better at like doing a lot of things at the same time, and like I used to be really productive on airplanes.
Oh yeah.
And then as I've gotten older, I can't. Like now it's just like total dead time to me. I can do what I do better than I could when I was younger, but I can only do it well if that's like the only thing I'm doing.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've tried to write on the road, which is sort of the, I think, music version of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But it's hard. I mean, I think it's also 2 totally different disciplines. Like we don't do the same show every night. We try to change things up. So I feel like we're writing this sort of, I mean, it's not like drastically different every night. We're not a jam band where like no song is the same.
Yeah.
But we do have like, I think honestly just we have a lot of like respect for that world and stuff and how cool it is to feel like as a fan, which we are, of course, of music as well, like to go to a show and not be 100% sure what's about to happen.
Yeah.
Creates like a certain level of excitement that we try to have. So you're writing a little bit for the show. So you're saying like, hey, crazy idea, coming in the morning, like crazy idea. What if we did a Taylor Swift song? Because something in the world happened with Taylor Swift, of course, or something, that's just an example. But, so at that point, that takes some of your sort of writing CPU, if you will.
Sure.
And I therefore, maybe if we were doing the same exact show, the same joke every night, and it was just this sort of autopiloted thing where you could just write the rest of the day.
Yeah.
But the way we do it, I really like. I'll sometimes just like be, you get to travel. So like sometimes you'll see something and I'll pull out my little voice note and be like, okay, I'll have a thought or something.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much like the extent of it. And sometimes, like I always tell myself, like, and I'm sure you feel the same way. It's like, just try to like experience things and then the best things will happen. Like just try to be a person who's on tour, who has hopefully an interesting life, and then channel that into something hopefully interesting from a writing perspective.
I heard Jerry Seinfeld say this thing about how like you make your money during the day, but you collect it at night.
Ooh, I love that.
Isn't that good?
I love that. I mean, especially for me, I'm a night person too.
Oh, I mean, not at all, but
really,
not at all. Yeah. I'm done by like 10 a.m. Like because I have young kids, so like my son woke up at 5:30 this morning.
Yeah.
By the time, I was at my desk having dropped them off to school, it was 8:14.
Yeah.
I was done by 10:30 today. Like creative writing, everything else is administrative crap, but that's in life, and I'm recording an audiobook, and I have like other stuff that I'm doing that's not uncreative. Yeah. But like the generative thing, all in the morning.
Wow. Sometimes I feel like I long for that, but I can't be that person.
Yes, because your audience is at night.
Yeah. Yeah.
Music is weird. I did this book for these rappers one time, and they were like, "Okay, we're gonna do some stuff in the studio." I'm like, "Okay, what time?" And they're like, "Get there like 1 a.m."
I've heard
like
that.
starting. That's
I know.
insane.
I know. I do think though, for some people, I guess, you know, for me and maybe those people, like I sort of get it in the sense that sometimes to get out of your own head, you have to be that loopy, tired.
Yeah.
You don't want there's diminishing returns. So like if you're exhausted, it's just it's not going to work. But like if you have a little bit of energy and that little bit of like maybe I'm becoming disillusioned, and all of a sudden something that would never have come out of you before. You know, if you're searching for, I guess that's just a different approach to creativity. But I don't know.
And like you can't like comedy and music. I feel like the audience doesn't want to hear it at 3 p.m, so you can't like do the show then. So you have to wire a good chunk of your life just around like when the audience is done with their work. That's when they're like, well, where are you guys?
100%. Yeah. And when you were saying that, I thought of the like, it's like a psychology. I don't know if it's even true, but the idea that like if you're drunk while you're studying, you should be drunk during the test. You know?
Yeah.
And so it's like, yeah, you should make your music at the like the best possible time for people to listen to it or something. But I don't know.
You can't record like a party song at
Exactly.
8:17 in the morning after you dropped your kids off at school. You got to like work your way up to that. It's like a slow burn kind of
Exactly.
thing.
Actually, I have an interesting thing. Years ago, my manager and I were, I guess he was managing some hip hop artists, and one of them came and was recording, and this was before Mount Joy, and he sort of figured out just from he was living with us for a couple of weeks. He was like, figured out that I do music and that I sing. And then he was like, I want to put you on a song. And I had like sang before, like in bands and stuff. And for me, he was successful enough that I was like, this is a good opportunity.
Yeah.
I can't say no, even though I don't fit in this song really. But so I said yes. Long story short, we're recording in like a closet somewhere in Los Angeles, and he's got the setup. And I start going, and he's kind of like, you gotta get pumped up, like to your point. It's like you gotta get pumped up, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get pumped up, like, but I'm a pretty like, even keel guy. And so he finally comes in, and he starts to kind of like pushing me and like roughing me up. And I was like, this is a really interesting approach. Like I've never done it again, but I've always pictured like in his music was like pretty high energy.
Yeah.
And I like the way he was approaching it was like when he went in, he would we then went to like a nicer studio, and he did his part, and he had people in there like a bunch of friends, and they were like pushing him around, like slapping him, and like it was this really physical thing. And I mean, I think the music like comes off that way. And in his concerts, he like takes his shirt off, and it's very sort of like I was gonna say menacing, but that's the wrong word. But
there is a menace and a harshness to it, which the whole thing is kind of preposterous in the sense where it's like, I hate you, so I wrote this poem about you.
Yeah.
Like there's something silly about it.
Yeah.
So like you have to kind of, I think, take on like a character, or like, which is art is pretend. You have to get into a place. You're writing about something you're by definition not experiencing in that moment.
Totally.
In a very artificial setting. You have to kind of tap into some like deeper vein. In the way that how does an actor or an actress just make themselves like cry on command? They have to like go somewhere else.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, it's funny because I feel like I don't know. I for me, it's like the whole experience of being a musician is sort of what you're talking about. Like you have to get into a headspace because that makes you feel like you can sing songs about your ex-girlfriend, and that's okay and not weird in and of itself.
Yeah. Or that I deeply mean this, but also I don't mean it at all. Like this isn't real. Like you're writing from the perspective of a character or something you haven't yourself experienced, but you're sincere about.
100%. And I do a lot of like almost all of my songs have some truth to them.
Yeah.
They're a story either that I am connected to or that it directly happened to me or whatever. And so at some point during our growth as a band, one of the ways that I deal with stage fright is that I'm like, this is really dumb. Which is like, to hear you say is preposterous, is like, that's sort of my approach in a way, is that like, whatever happens here, hopefully it goes well. Hopefully I sing the right notes.
Yeah.
But this is preposterous. This is all sort of a joke anyways.
Yeah.
And so like the levels to it are that like, if you don't take yourself too seriously kind of thing, and then seeing people who take that to a whole nother level where there's this whole sort of, I'm pretty reserved on stage. I'm not like climbing the scaffolding or anything like that. But you do see people doing that, and I think it sort of helps me actually to be like, people take this to extreme levels of being preposterous, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just up here just sort of just let me sing about my ex-girlfriend, whatever.
It's kind of funny that like this thing that pretty much everyone thought was lame in high school, like all like entertainment, and I'm including writing, theater, singing, all of it, like it was all not cool, like decidedly uncool.
Yeah.
And then as soon as everyone left high school and went to their respective place and then somehow succeeds at that thing, then it becomes not just like cool, but the coolest thing.
Right.
And so sometimes, I just try to go like, you're a fucking nerd, dude.
Yeah.
You write about ancient philosophy and then you get up and you talk to people about it with these stupid slides. Like that feels, it's not like an imposter syndrome, like, but it is just trying to kind of like wipe away maybe like the ego and self-importance, which can create like a fear or a, like just a paralyzation.
Totally.
You kind of lower the stakes by going like, this is really silly.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, like in the sort of philosophical way, like there's so many different ways to, I guess, approach like, whether it's stage fright or whatever, but the sort of anxiety around being an artist. And I think one of the things that I think about is like, there's the idea, like obviously control what you can control is such a big part of all of that stuff. But the problem with that is that like you're in some control here as a performer, as a writer or whatever. It's like, and so you do put a certain amount of pressure on yourself to control that situation, and that creates its own anxiety.
Yeah.
But I think what really helps with that is to be like, well, even within that, I've prepared as much as I can or whatever it is. And truly the best medicine for me is just being like, and it's all very silly.
Yes. I just did this talk in Brazil. And so when you do like talks like I do in foreign countries, as an American, you're just like so entitled. Like, of course everyone speaks English, right?
Yeah.
And in most of the audiences they do. But when you do like in countries where English is not actually the main language, everyone in the audience has headphones and it's being routed through a translator, so like in real time. So one of this was like 5,000 people, is an insane amount of people. Wow. And they weren't here to see me. It was a conference. So it was just like one of the people. It's like a festival audience. Yeah. Like you don't get to give yourself credit for all the people.
We call that a soft audience.
Yes. Yeah. So it's like, it's a soft audience, and then like there's going to be this delay, which effectively, like in what I do, means that you get nothing from the audience, because you're not like, they're not breaking into applause, they're not getting up and dancing. So basically I was just like, I just had to tell myself, I'm going to go do something that I'm going to get literally crickets for. So just don't stress about it at all. There really is no good or bad performance here. There's just like, did you do it?
Yeah.
And they knew what they were bringing when they brought you, that they chose someone who didn't speak English, right? Or who only spoke English. And so kind of just, figuring out some way to address the stakes so you can kind of just go and be present and do the thing. Yeah. You're always just finding some version of that for the unique situation that you're going into.
Here's a question.
Yeah.
Did it work?
I don't know. No, I didn't. I have no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, I created a self-contained thing where that way I didn't walk off stage in a cold sweat and be like, I got nothing. Like I had to go know in advance. And I guess I'll get the video of it after.
But I mean, like for you, like, because I mean, ultimately,
I think I did good.
Yeah, like you went into it, you didn't feel nervous, you didn't feel, like, not that you didn't feel nervous. I'm sure you felt a little nervous, but.
Well, I have this like little piece of art on our wall at our house that someone gave me, and they didn't know how perfect it was. But like I remember, I was backstage before a thing. Oftentimes there's like a bunch of speakers, and so obviously I'm like trying to get in my headspace. So I'm not paying attention at all of what's happening on stage. And then the person comes off stage and I was like, you were great up there.
Yeah.
And of course I don't know if they were great. I was just being nice.
Sure.
And then afterwards I got off and someone was like, you were great. And I remember feeling like, yes.
Yeah.
And then,
you took it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then like at like my next talk, someone gave me this piece of art and it literally just says, you were great up there. And I think about that all the time because it's just like, actually if people said it was terrible or good, it doesn't, you have to kind of create your own little bubble where you decide whether it was good or not.
Mm-hmm.
even though you also care about delivering a great show, but like if you're riding or dying on how it felt to you from the place you are least fit to judge what's happening, you're setting yourself up for some very fragile post-performance feelings.
For sure. The music version of that is great set, dude.
Yeah.
Everyone always says that, like at festivals. Everyone's just walking around like, great set, dude. No one saw the set. You know what I mean? Like, they were all like getting changed, but you'll see a guy be like, great set, dude. You'll be like, you too, man, great set.
Yeah.
But
just the ease with which you give it to other people, and then the weight in which it feels with you. And then realizing that, when people say nice things or mean things about you on the internet, they didn't even experience what they were giving this nice or mean opinion about.
Yeah.
It's just things people say.
Yeah. No, well, it's interesting. I was thinking about your approach to, I mean, I've read your writing. I think obviously a lot of people listening to this have read your writing. I think it's interesting to imagine you, the person who is dispensing so much amazing knowledge, like in practice, like going in front of thousands of people or in a pretty stressful situation and leaning on all the things that you
it's still like the job. Like I think that must be fascinating for you too, in that like music is this thing, it's this artistic thing, and then also it's this like you have to be at the Moody Center at a time tomorrow.
Yeah, sure.
And like go through some motions, and then you have to like go up and do a thing from this time to this time. And if you're short, they're mad. If you're long, they're mad.
Sure.
And then there's just like, it's a thing. And so like seeing it as kind of a profession that people have done for a long time, there's like tips and tricks. Sure. It's like, it's also part of that kind of demystification that you need to have to like know how to do it.
Totally. Well, and I think about how like, I don't know. And I wonder what all the things that you've learned, make you feel about this, but like for me, I think it's when I'm healthy, mentally, physically,
sure,
and like, just generally doing well, I feel like I don't have to necessarily, like there's sort of an autopilot good energy going into something. Like we're talking about like public speaking, or even if it's something as simple as like I really need to call a family member and tell them they need to do X, Y, or Z, or my opinion on something which is stressful or whatever. Those things just happen when you're in that like good flow. Mm-hmm. But I feel like when I lean on, or when I'm having the internal monologue of like control what you can control, or whatever you're trying to say, or like, I do the mine is what if you're great, like trying to just unwind.
What does that mean?
Someone taught me this once, and it really works. But it's like, or for me anyway. The idea is that if you're having performance anxiety, and you could apply this to anything, but it's like that what's happening is you're projecting that something is going to go bad, or that you're going to have a less than ideal performance, or the phone call with your friend's going to go bad, or whatever. And like with equal likelihood, you could just try to turn the tide and be like, what if it goes really well?
Yeah.
Like, what if I actually start having almost a grandiose illusion about it? Like what if it actually, like, what if this person comes in? Because ultimately, it's all completely, you don't know. The outcome is completely unknown. So it could be just as likely that you're going to kill it. And it's actually probably more likely the more you think like that. So it's like, so just to try to turn the tide and stop the feedback loop of anxiety, to just be like, all right, about to go out there. There's a lot of people out there.
Plan for success also, not just like it's all going to fall apart because you suck and you're not going to, you can't do this.
Exactly.
I remember I was talking to a finance person once. I was like getting some advice from them, and I was like, and obviously this isn't going to keep going, it's going to like, and cause like, I was like, I just done this book deal. So like, this is my last big one. And then it all goes back to normal. And he was like, this is all great to think about, but he's like, have you ever thought about a career trajectory in which you continue to be successful, Exactly. And I was like, no, because that felt like kind of presumptuous and weird. And it is like, you can't just go like the artist that takes their future for granted isn't going to do the work. But just the idea of like, if you're always playing it small or playing not to lose, you're probably not going to win. And there's going to be things that you need to be able to conceive of that your sort of small-mindedness is preventing you from conceiving of.
Yeah. That makes me think about like when you're writing a book, or I guess just writing in general, or even podcasting, and you have like a really good idea, but you haven't done it yet. You haven't written it. You haven't like actually put it on the page or even fully mapped out maybe the plan for a book or something, do you tell people?
No.
Yeah.
Never.
Exactly.
You don't talk about it. You got to keep that energy in the thing.
Yeah.
Because to me, that's like buying. It's like putting it on a credit card or something.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
You're like or it's like a payday loan. It's like very high interest.
It's
it's like
crippling interest.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like because you're getting if you're like, hey, I got this idea. Well, it's actually two things. So best case scenario, you tell someone about the idea. You're like, that's fucking awesome. You're great. Yeah. And then you already got the reward. So maybe you're not going to do it.
Got the dopamine.
And then the other thing, which is more likely, is you go like, so I had this like amazing idea for a book, and you start to say it, and then you're like, oh, this sounds so dumb. Never mind. It's so dumb. You get like the cringe of like you have to ideas. Like you got to go figure it out. You can't like if you were describing to me this song you were thinking of writing, I'd be like, sure, that sounds great.
Totally.
Like I'd be rolling my eyes because it probably sounds terrible.
Well,
like
this is what I'm doing right now. This is my life right now. So I'm making tons of voice memos, and my manager is here. Occasionally we'll be like, I was thinking about this on the flight just a couple hours ago. He was like, he'll be like, hey, send me some voice memos. Like, I'd love to hear like what you're working on. Yeah. And I just sort of, and this is not going to be a funny thing where he's going to be like, that's why you never send me voice memos. But I can't. Not because I don't want him to hear it. I'm maybe even excited about it, or maybe I'm not, or maybe I'm nervous, whatever. I can't say what it is. But it's exactly that. It's like you don't want to. It's like stolen valor or something like that. Like you don't want to do that because for everything you just said, and also I just think that it lowers your confidence, like really in an interest in my confidence. Because I find myself. The idea is only going to be good. It has a high ceiling, but there's plenty more to do. So as soon as you like can put it, I don't know. It's like once it like gets out of the water before it can breathe or something like that, then you're like, oh, this thing can't even breathe. Oh, like, you know,
it's like dead on arrival or something. Yeah, editors are always like, just send me some of the chapters you're working on. Like, it's I don't know. Yeah, it'd be like, show me the piece of the house you're building. You gotta once it's largely framed out, built, like there's places where people can start to see it, but that it's most precarious and vulnerable in that like idea phase, and you gotta go do the actual work before you can show people it.
Now, do people like? You're a successful writer. Do people pitch you things, and are like, is it
to put in my stuff?
Well, yeah, but no. I mean, now that I'm thinking about this, I'm realizing I've had experiences. Not that I'm judging people for this, but I've had experiences where people kind of come to me because they think I'm some sort of source of knowledge for songwriting or whatever, and they're like, I've got this, great. Like they're doing the thing. Yeah. And I'm working on this or I'm working on that sort of type conversation, and I wonder if it's like. I don't know. I wonder if it becomes a cultural known thing that's like, don't do that. Like,
yeah, it should be like, keep it to your fucking self until you do it, man. Like,
don't tell me. I can't help you. Yeah.
Although, as I was going to ask you about this, I'm fascinated with this thing. I think Max Martin, the songwriter, calls it like the PCH test. Do you know this?
No.
Okay, so he'll write a song. And then he does a demo of it, and then he puts it in his car and he drives up PCH.
Oh,
and he has to hear it there.
Yeah.
And the idea of thinking of music not just as this like isolated artistic expression to the artist, but like a thing that does a job for someone. And the job is like, we listen to music in our car, and there's no more representative experience or better drive than the PCH.
It's a commercial, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like, does it work there?
Yeah.
And there's a story about the Rolling Stones too, where they couldn't decide like between two different singles on their album.
Yeah.
So the manager sent it to a radio station, and then they heard it on the radio in the car driving just to see which one it was.
Yeah.
The idea of like testing the thing in a real environment is very interesting to me.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I think there's a couple of things I think about. One is this is what I think creates what we call demoitis, because I think that's super intentional. I'm going to drive up PCH, but even like there's less intentional things where it's like you're making something, and I'll often have my voice memo or something. I'm driving, I'm stuck in traffic. Let me just, because sometimes it's actually just really helpful to hear it back in a different environment, in
Yeah.
a different space, because then maybe you come up with a lyrical idea in the car and you're like recording it on the literally do that kind of stuff all the time. But I think then what happens is there's an attachment to, let's say you're driving at the PCH or whatever, and you're like, man, this sounds so good. I think like I'm become convinced this is album 4, and I've been doing this for even beyond that, like that the best sounding song to an artist, to the person creating it, is somewhere between the demo and the final product in terms of like the mixing and the mastering and all this stuff that ultimately sort of like shines up this thing that you made.
Yeah.
Because it starts to get away from those probably feelings you maybe had when you were going up the PCH and you were just listening and like, maybe the drums were a little too loud or like maybe the voice needed some reverb or whatever it was. But then once those things are added, I think it becomes this thing where that's the expectation of what music should sound like.
Okay.
But it wasn't your thing. It's a little different than what your thing is. And that like probably imperceptible, like I heard Benny Blanco talking about this, like the crap you put into a song in the last like little bit can make an enormous difference actually for like the commercial viability of the song.
Yeah.
But I actually think most people, if like put in a situation where they just listen to the old demo and then they listen to that, they, like Suits, so to speak, I think would easily be like that, the newer, the crispy, the loud, the whatever it is, give me that. But I think like the soul of people actually really would love to hear people's more like, I'm not saying super rough where it's like unintelligible, but this zone where it's like you've gotten it, the artist has taken it as far as they want it to go.
Yeah.
And of course, like there's mixing and stuff that happens where you're like, oh, I love that. You just made that so much better. I'm not saying it's a totally, unimportant art, but I think for me, there's so many times, and I hear about this all the time with artists, where it's like you get stuck with the mixer because the mixer's saying you have demoitis. And it's like, it's happened enough now over enough years with me and with friends who are artists where it's like, I don't think that's like an evil thing that happens to artists. I think it's a real thing sort of to what you're talking about, where there's this attachment to the, like the sort of living organism that was this imperfect piece of art.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think like it could just be things like that. Like maybe you drove in the car and you heard it and like just exactly like that. You even, sometimes I'll have the thought internally and not tell anyone, but I'll be like, this is going to work.
Yeah.
Like,
but that's what I mean. It's like feeling it in the environment that gives you the sense, like the context that you consume the thing matters.
Yeah.
But you're rarely creating it or experiencing it in that context. Like one of the things I learned on my books is, so like you can see over there, that's like an audiobook that I'm doing.
Nice.
But like they send you they'll send you the PDF of your book to like edit once it's been designed.
Yeah.
But nobody reads it as a PDF.
Right.
So I was like, no, you got to print it. It's got to look exactly like the book. So as I'm doing my final edits, I'm somewhat close to the context in which someone's going to be doing it. Like I've told this one before, but Raymond Chandler would write with these really small pages. Like he wouldn't use a large sheet in a typewriter because he knew his book would ultimately come out as a small paperback. Right. And so, on a page, you have this whole page to get to this thing.
Sure.
But the actual reader, that might be 3 or 4 pages. Yeah. So they just read 4 pages where nothing happened.
Yeah.
But if he'd written on a small page, it would have shrunk the context. Way. Yeah. So just thinking about the context in which the thing is going to happen. Yeah. Like, hey, people read my book on airplanes.
The medium is the message.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think ultimately that's why songs sound the way they do, actually, right? Yeah. It's because, like, well, they're not going to drive in their car with all of the sort of context you have about how the song was made and, why choices were made. But yeah, I just mean from the artist, and I wonder if it's probably a little different writing-wise, because I guess editing is probably, well, you can tell me, like, I assume it's pretty technical, like, hey, this is a bad comma here or something like that.
I think music feels much more sui generis. It's like you did the thing and then there's little tweaks here or there, but writing is the process of writing and rewriting and rewriting and rewriting, because you can move the stuff around. It's not the fact that it was singularly performed. There's no sense of like, this is it. Yeah. It's like, it's different.
Yeah.
But I feel like, speaking of context, maybe this is me projecting or adding my own experience, but you guys feel like a road trip band to me. Am I making that up?
One of our first, like, playlist or whatever that we got was like road trip something or other, and
someone made that on Spotify or something.
Yeah, exactly, and our song like did well there, and it had a decent following, and I think from that moment it's sort of like we got, yeah, I guess that's just happened naturally. But I remember seeing that and being like, I feel like that's objective. Like we are the road trip band, you know?
Yeah,
something
like, and not like a road trip through Belgium. It's like feels like a very American, like West, like. And I couldn't decide if I was making this up because I have listened to you guys on road trips. Like I think I found you guys right before the pandemic, and then we did a road trip during the pandemic. So I remember, you know, you associate music with events in your life, but it just you feel like a band that works in the car.
Yeah.
In the same, and that's what made me think of the car test, where you're like, obviously you wouldn't test classical music necessarily on the PCH. Like certain music does certain jobs, but. Yeah, maybe a rapper has to hear it in a club or something to know if it's working.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think for me it's interesting. One, I think the band sounding good in the car, I think in part is because we're a band.
Yeah.
You know, like we're kind of a dying breed. There are other bands out there for sure, but
you're a band, not a group.
Yeah, or exactly, or like you know, like it's me, but then we have like incredible players in the band who really like I'm bringing, you know, lyrical content and maybe some chords, and then ultimately what you're hearing is this band that like comes together to, you know, make the song sound really great or whatever. And I think like bands work in a car.
Yeah,
you know, there's an energy about a band, you know, whereas like sort of super produced pop music, of course, also works in a car, but I think on a road trip, maybe like there's the nostalgia with road trips. I think there's sort of nostalgia about bands. I think that's one piece of it. And then I think the other piece, maybe hopefully for me, self-serving, is like lyrically, and then where the songs just start, like on guitar and whatever. Like some of my most inspired and sort of like, you know, when my antenna are like really reaching things, I feel like is like being on a train and looking out the window, or like being in a car and just like, you know, looking out the window and seeing, I guess just seeing America really, you know, growing up doing road trips. And where Mountjoy started was I was from the East Coast. I was in my young 20s, and I moved to Los Angeles, not even really chasing music, but, you know, when you're in Los Angeles, you're in your young 20s, like you're hiking around, you're experiencing nature as much as you can, because, I mean, I love Philadelphia. It's one of my favorite places on the planet, but like geographically, physically quite different.
LA doesn't get enough credit for the amount of geographic diversity you can get within like 2 hours.
It's like I mean, it's one of the most stunning cities. My wife is Brazilian. I went to Rio, and I was like, Rio is also incredibly beautiful, but in a really similar way to LA, where you have like the mountains crashing into the ocean very dramatically, and like there aren't many places like that I've personally been to. So so I was doing that in LA, and then that's when the start of these songs came out. So I feel like hopefully it's just the natural, like, these songs kind of come from being an observer of the road, and it's cool.
I know something random I just learned on the internet, so it's probably, I wouldn't say it's misinformation because the stakes here are low, but do you know what? LA's weird in that it's by this beautiful ocean, Santa Monica, and then an enormous port, Long Beach, but like the actual city of Los Angeles is not near those things.
Right.
That's because the Spanish passed a law that said the founding of all new cities had to be 20 miles from the ocean because they were tired of having to build forts to defend against pirates.
Whoa.
That's why LA, so it's next to a river, like, you know, Olivera Street where Union Station is downtown. Like that, obviously the river is near there. It's not really a big deal anymore because they paved it. Like it's classic Los Angeles. But like it was founded next to a river as opposed to a seaport because it's more expensive to defend seaports from raiding other imperial powers.
That's incredible. It makes it the most unique sort of city that I've been to, just design wise. Like there's no other city that's so residential and sort of like Picasso'd, like you're describing, where it's like, like you have this like ocean, and then like, okay, downtown's like over here, but downtown's sort of like in the corner, and then you know,
it's
like
weird.
Mountains up here. It is a very like, you know, whereas of course I'm from Philadelphia, I think it's like the first gridded American. And most of the big American cities are on a grid, and
Well, you're like in downtown. You're in downtown LA, where I've lived, and you're like, you guys know the ocean is like 12 or like you can get to the water like really fast. Like this is insane. What are we doing here?
Yeah.
But then you're like, oh, okay, somebody made a decision in like the 1700s, and that's why it's here.
It's rendered. I mean, the downtown. I think there's always like, is it coming back or something? But it's rendered it like pretty irrelevant in the sort of like cultural zeitgeist that is like Los Angeles. I think you think of other places before, even especially when you're there. It's like it's pretty rare for someone to be like, "We're going downtown today." You know?
Yeah. Or if you live downtown, you're like, "I've been to the ocean like 5 times since I've moved here."
Yeah.
You live in totally different places.
Yeah.
I feel like you guys have gotten much bigger since I talked to you last. Do you feel that?
Yeah, I think, but only like this summer.
Oh.
It started to feel that way. I mean, you know, I guess like when I found out we were playing Madison Square Garden, being a kid from
They just tell you that, or you decide to do? How does that work?
I guess a little bit of both. You know, we played Central Park, and we did 2 nights there last time. And I think it just kind of gets to a point where I think both of those were like over 5,000 tickets, and it was sold out. And then like Madison Square Garden, like the next step is like, okay, you did 10,000 tickets last time. The next step ups are like, I mean, inside baseball, I guess, but like Forest Hills or Madison Square Garden. And yeah, so I guess in a way you sort of choose, but you get there via like, well, your ticket sales have led you to this place. Yeah, I guess that, but then, you know, once we kind of got out this summer and we played specifically North America, like Europe's a little different for us, a little further behind. But yeah, like once we started doing these shows this summer, I mean, we were in Meriwether Post Pavilion and like the DC area, and it's like 14,000 people there. And I think that amount of people, for some reason, it like, you're like, all of us, I think collectively in the band, because we've had these conversations internally a lot this summer, we're just like, what the hell? You know, like it's wild.
Well, and it would probably be more explicable, is that how you say it? If you had like one new song that was responsible for all of it.
Yeah.
It feels like people are just discovering stuff that's been around for a while, which is, I think, is a good reminder to people who are making stuff, which is like, if people haven't heard it, it's still new.
Yeah.
And so that's not typically how it goes. Usually it's powered on what's coming out. Not that your new stuff isn't great and popular, but like you're just, there's not like you're like, this is why they were in this movie or this clip went viral or whatever.
100%. I don't have a choice, but I love that.
Sure.
Like I think it makes it a thing. Like we were just talking about making the album. It takes a little bit of pressure off it, but it also, I think, puts the right pressure on creating when you're like, hey, actually just make something great. Yeah. And make that Barbie that you believe that, and that you're not lying to yourself. Because I think I think there's a laziness or just whatever inside of everyone that's like, it's good enough. Mm-hmm. But like it's
good because I made it.
Yeah. But to push past that and be like, make something, or try to, of course. Not everything that we make is truly great or whatever. That's not what I'm saying. But to really, because that even if the first round, because we've experienced this, to your point, where it's like, even if the first thing, comes out and isn't received critically acclaimed or whatever, you never know, especially now with like the way TikTok and Reels and those types of things have like just dug up like so many old songs for people. Yeah. I just sang on a song, Lake Missoula by Richie Mitch and the Coal Miners, that was made in 2017. And they had another song, Evergreen, which is also 2017. That became one of like, I mean, it's been used in big political ad campaigns. Like, it's just this sort of sound that went crazy 7-8 years later. Yeah. And, so you never know what sort of technology is going to dig your music or art up in some way. Yeah. And then for us, I think if I could, like, just compliment the band and the work that we've done, it's like, I also think it's that combination of like, if you get an opportunity to work hard and you do it and you put in the work and you get better, and then as more and more people show up, you're more and more prepared to meet that moment. Yeah. I think there's a little bit of that combined with luck and all that stuff that's helped us out.
Well, it compounds as opposed to, like, we think of the algorithm as being this thing that like plucks something from obscurity and blows it up, but it's also something where it's like it's noticing, and we're projecting on it, but it's noticing that more and more people like this, and so it's showing it to more and more people. And so like with authors, like oftentimes like the best thing you can do for your book is to write another book, because now someone's read 2 books from you, and then 3 books. So just this kind of building this base that doesn't seem, it suddenly one day you look back and it's big, but it never felt like there was some pivot moment where it went from obscurity to everyone knew about. And by the way, it tends not to work out that well for those people. Like everyone who goes from nothing to an overnight sensation, like it tends to be disorienting and destabilizing and often very destructive. It's probably better to have maybe a lower ceiling, but a longer time span.
Totally. I mean, I think about just the last piece of which is that you have to be prepared to meet that moment over and over and over again. If you go straight to the top, and on the backs of a song, a moment, a singular moment, or maybe a couple things, well, now you're here. And, from a music perspective, like, or whatever, like, you're up here, it's you, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, the Beyonce, Taylor Swift, whatever. If you're up in that upper echelon of, like, cultural phenomenon, then you have to meet that moment repeatedly, or else you're not as good as those people, and it's doing this. Even though it's this trajectory line is still keeping you like, we're down here. We're doing great, but you're doing
failed
bad.
album sold like millions of copies.
Exactly. It's all relative, but like I think especially now, like perceived regression is like so much more harmful to your career in anything than just I think just like being consistent in some way over the long haul. Of course, like you could look at it the other way and be like, well, those people made more money in 1 year than you're going to make in 10, which is like maybe great for them, right?
Sure.
But I don't know. We'll take it. I mean, like we're just like really enjoying the crowds, and also just like we've because I think of the way we've done it, it creates this sense of community. The people that have like come back and are like, really feel like they've gotten to see us do that.
Sure.
They've grown with us, like.
They saw you at this venue, then this venue, then this. They got to experience the small shows to the big shows.
I would say that's one of the things that people, we sometimes do, like meet with people before the shows. Like that's one of the most common things that people say to us is like, I saw you when, sort of thing. And that's like my favorite type of fan interaction, in the sense where I'm like, like we're just doing this weird thing together, aren't we? And like you can see how crazy this. You saw my terrible haircut in 2018, whatever it was, right? And that's that's a huge part of why I think that people have fun at our shows, because there is this like sense of like the crowd's winning too.
That's true. Yeah, as opposed to maybe how it was, I think, when I was a kid, where it's like bands were always being like resented for succeeding or breaking through to some level. Maybe because it's less visible, there's less of that.
Yeah, I think
like I don't feel like anyone talks about selling out anymore.
I thought that's what you're getting at. I was just gonna say, like, I feel like when we were first touring, we're in a van, and I feel like you can really understand where that culture came from, because it's really hard. It's hard work. You're touring in a van, and you kind of become friends with this group of very also strange colleagues of yours, right? Who are also
colleague competitors. Yeah,
they're like also touring in a van. They have a cool thing going for them, but the secret that you all know is that you're all broke. Yeah, your business is a terrible business. It makes no money. It actually at times loses money, and it's that part of it's really stressful. So I think when a band like gets a bus, and like it's like your friend gets a new house or something, or gets a new car. It's like it's so easy to be like, screw them, you know, like
as if it's like a finite pie.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that that's where it came from. But I just think this like new generation of artists, and really just like now that no one isn't getting marketed to at any 1 second, at any one time. It is just full on, it used to be like the commercials are annoying. Now it's like, well, like during commercial, you're also holding a phone. You're getting like 3 commercials at once. is a band or an artist or a writer or someone promoting themselves and succeeding is just, I really do feel like you're right, like there's a softness to that now where it's like, of course, I'm sure some people are like, those guys are lame, they're playing to so many people or something, which is fine. I think that's cool, but I think for most people, they're just like, oh, that's so cool that they're doing that.
Have you been able to update your self-perception? Mine has been that way too, where there wasn't sort of one pivotal moment. It was like a series of just kind of slow, consistent increases that it's like, yeah, you wake up one day and you're like, man, my hair is long. Like, I need to cut my hair. Like, it's been a while,
Yeah.
And that's been good because I think it's healthier, but it also made it hard if you're someone who is a little insecure, if you are not super optimistic, it can be hard for you to update your self-perception that you're like, I'm good. I can do this. This is my job now. Not that I've made it in that sense, like I never have to work hard, but like this isn't, I'm not like a flash in the pan.
Yeah.
Because you didn't have this moment where you were suddenly like the number one album in the country for several weeks in a row. Yeah. It's a slower, more gradual thing. How do you update your self-perception?
I think that's probably something I struggle with the most. If I'm being honest, is that like I would love, of course, for one of our songs to just be crowned. Like you watch that happen.
That's your hit.
Yeah, like I would love for that to happen. I'm not willing artistically to like push all the chip. Like there are certain ways. Yeah. I think that one could do that now, and because you learn like, oh man, like this type of song, if you have these certain elements, then like you're maybe more likely.
Yeah.
And some of that I think you try to use, but like to go all the way in and just try to make a hit is something that I feel like because of this success that we're talking about, it's like it's not worth like because those people will see that for what it is.
Yeah.
I'll get exposed or something. But yeah, I think that's the thing I'm worst at is that I sometimes have this sort of growing chip on my shoulder that like, man, I think what we're doing is just as good or something. But, I quickly try to flush that because I think it goes back to what you were saying about like not wanting, you're talking about speaking to like a financial advisor or whatever and like being like, oh, well, soon this is going to be over.
Yeah.
I think that's what drives me actually is this idea that like, well, we haven't ever had a hit. Like, no, there's nothing that's going to, exist even in the future for us. And I do tell myself that all the time. I think I'm still pretty much the same mindset, which is so funny because each album I do this where it's like, just write one more good album.
Yeah. This is your last go around.
It's the Trump thing or whatever. Yeah. It's like, there'll never have to be an election again. If you make a certain quality thing, then like, of course you'll want to keep creating, but it'll be stress free. There'll be nothing to worry about. Like, like moves hands, however. But like, I think I know deep down that that's not true because I've gone around the loop enough times.
You actually can imagine a world where this is not your last album. That you are going to get another shot. Like you bought yourself a couple more shots.
Exactly. And I think that's the most I've been able to change is just to start to see that to see the patterns enough.
Yeah.
To be like, this is probably the anxiety that actually got you here working again. But and maybe to accept that anxiety is just like a part of the creative process for me, but I don't know if it's healthy.
Yeah, I don't think it's like, how long can you be fueled by like insecurity, doubt, scarcity? At some point you have to switch over to the fuel of like, I'm a professional that does this thing. The size of the crowd, the money might change at some point, or obviously at some point all artists become less culturally relevant because it's a young person's game.
Yeah.
But like you've established or earned enough that like your people are there. You have your people. And yeah, there's some feeling that if you ever allow yourself to think that it's all over and you stop being creatively good, but clearly that's not the case, for so many great artists.
Yeah, and I try to focus on those, because I think it's just as easy, and I'm sure it's the same, when you look at writers, it's like you start to get to album 4 or whatever. Like I remember doing this for album 2 or whatever, being like, oh, like people's second albums always flop or something like that. Like you can't flop here. This is a can't flop situation or whatever. And but on the flip side, we're making our fourth album, and you start to be like, well, this is usually where I have these thoughts. I'll be like, this is usually where bands kind of start to lose the thread, or and I've thought a lot about why that is. Maybe they started making a little bit of money. They don't need it as much or whatever it is. But I think being aware of those things helps me. But like I said, I'm not sure that it's a healthy way to create things, but I'm definitely like trying to prove myself and these people who don't even know that I'm measuring myself to them wrong. It's like,
my therapist said to me one time, she uses this phrase, like, what I make up is, and like, it's always interesting, like how we have, you're like fourth album's worth it, but I bet I could come up with 1,000 counterexamples where actually like the fifth album was the biggest album. It's just, we tell some story to ourselves based on what we want to be true, even if that thing like isn't positive.
Totally. Confirmation bias all the way. Yeah.
Yeah. That's so funny.
Totally. I mean, and I even, like I was going to say, I even look, when I get too down that rabbit hole, like you go in and you look at people that you really look up to, and that's the sort of what if you're great at that, right? It's to be like, okay, you could look at this band that like,
what if you're the National?
Sure. Or like, exactly. Like these people that have just had sustained success over a longer tail. And I think at this point, in a really cool way, I think it's a privilege to be able to look at, people that I look up to, like the National or like even like, I don't know, going further back, like the Rolling Stones you were talking about, or anybody, right, that you look up to, and seeing that like, I like to look at bands from like the 60s and 70s just because it's like I'm still thinking about them.
Yeah, that's some longevity.
And if you can do that, then you solve the financial advisor thing. It's like, well, like people should talk them from the 60s or whatever, right? Yeah. So that is the dream, and I do very much model like, as much as you can, it's creativity. I can't come up with the songs those people did, but
sure,
I try to understand like what is it about the Grateful Dead? Like what is it about sort of name the band Neil Young or Joni Mitchell, or like what is it about these things that have like they're so sustaining?
Yeah.
Through like different generations, they just pick up right where the last one left off, and they're like, this is great, and it's still great. It's like there's something.
And how much of it is like they kept making music and they kept touring? If they like, obviously some of the people died, so it's not a foolproof thing. But like, just the idea that like the main thing is to like keep doing the thing.
You have to keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think eventually, like, the truth is that I love doing it.
Yeah.
And like sharing, my love for music with people, hopefully, and speaking for the band too, like we have just a bunch of people, like you can't be in the band sort of business. It's a difficult business for like a bazillion different reasons unless you like really love music. And I hope like that one thing that carries us is that like that comes off, that like because people hopefully who are experiencing music live or recorded music have that same feeling.
Yeah. It was weird. I saw a band a couple weeks ago. I won't say who because they gave me the tickets. But like, I was like, this is a very joyless performance. And I sent it to the person, and he was like, oh yeah, he's like off the wagon. That's why. Oh, and I was like, oh, he was like, it's like an opioids thing. Oh, no. And I was like, oh, interesting. Because I like, you could feel it. You could feel that this person was just doing the thing that they do.
Right.
And as opposed to like enjoying that they were up there.
Yeah, we played a show in Alaska. I was just talking about this with a friend, and it was one of the best shows of the whole summer. This was a few weeks ago. And total surprise, we'd never been to Alaska. Ticket sales were great. It was sort of like, this is going so well. And then the crowd, I mean, jumping up and down, singing, just picture scenes, right? Yeah. Just like, it went so well. And got to talking with people, and it's exactly that, right? It's that like they're starved of people coming there. Yeah. And so when they get the chance, they just approach it with this joy of like, it doesn't, there's something that happens, I think, because at least in music, it's so saturated. Yeah. There's so many artists. Spotify's done an amazing thing to like make the pool really wide, but very shallow maybe. Yeah. And I think what ends up happening is if you have amazing band on Friday, amazing band on Saturday in your city, then maybe you go there with this, in my opinion, like really can I say shitty? Shitty attitude that doesn't exist in some of the other places where you're standing there and you're like, you're genuinely listening to the music and ranking it.
Yeah.
Like you're ranking it against other artists or something like that, as if that, like, there's only one outcome there in which you're going to have fun, right? When you're like, this is the best.
Like, have you seen videos of some of those heavy metal bands that played behind the Iron Curtain in the 80s and I guess, late 80s, sometimes early 90s?
No.
Where were there really 500,000 Metallica fans in Moscow, or were these music fans?
100%.
But they're just, it's insane. The performance is insane because they're just like literally anyone doing the act of music that's a form of free expression, not from our line, and it's just insane. Like the performances are insane. The videos, you're like, who are these people?
Yeah, but that to me, so they're the same type of thing, but a little different is that, like, I saw a video a long time ago. I think it was like Imagine Dragons, who like are a big band here, but there's like a, like, is it cool enough? Who cares?
They're like the Nickelback of our time.
Sure.
In terms of the unfair place they hold in popular culture.
100%. And I think super unfair because for me, it's like, that's not actually, to me, like, if you don't like music, then like, just keep it moving.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not like no one, like, people, of course, I'm not saying you can't like have a discourse where you're like, I think this is bad. Like, I think that's a fun discourse. I'm not like even like shitting on that. But I think the reality is that, like, if you buy tickets to this concert, the thing that you must do is have fun. Yeah. Like, don't block yourself from being able to like achieve the best possible night. And when you see like them in Brazil, it's like, I don't know. I mean, like the Beatles or something. Like people, like it's like people are like just losing their minds. Yeah. And I think the point is like, don't fake that. Of course, like don't go there and like lose your mind. But at least put yourself in a position where you're like, I'm gonna go to a concert and I'm gonna have a lot of fun. And to be fair, I think a lot of people do this, and I think people do this at our concerts, which is why I think I love our fan base. But you see it in varying degrees in different places, right? So.
There's a skate park down the street, and I was walking by the other day, and these kids were listening to like Puddle of Mud, like young kids. And my first instinct was like, that's like not a cool band, because they were not a cool band when I was a kid. Sure. And then I was like, oh, they're just able to enjoy them as a band. Yeah. Like to them, they're what heavy metal was to me when I was a kid, which is like 20 years old. Yeah. And it just is. Like you either like it or you don't, but it's not of the moment, so you're not judging. The critical opinion is not important, like sales are not important. It's just are you vibing with the song or not? Yeah. And there's a freedom to that I think foreign audiences get to enjoy, which is why there'll be bands that are not big here, and then you'll like follow them on Instagram or whatever, and they're touring some stadium in Mumbai or something, and it's the audience doesn't get as much music, and then also the audience just either likes it or doesn't like it. They're not like, are these a cool, could you invite a girl to this show or not? Like it's just like, this is a good concert, yes or no? Yeah. Yeah. I mean that, but even I think like one step further of like, it would be hard, I think, in that what I've seen from like, picture this Brazilian audience or the Alaskan audience for us, like there's not much we could have done to not make that crowd have that reaction. Yeah. They were going there to do that. Yeah. Like that's, and I guess what I'm saying is that I think there have been eras in that are revered in American music history and globally where that was just the attitude, right? Like, I mean, how great is Elvis, or was it just like people liked music? And they were just like, otherwise you were sitting on the floor, like listening to a radio, like this guy's crazy. You know what I mean? I think it's always relative to what's available in your town and what's possible. But, I mean, to the whole, like, Nickelback and stuff thing, Puddle of Mud or whatever, one thing that I think happens, and it's like, you see this politically too, where it's like, people really gets in their craw if something that they don't like is wildly popular. Yeah. I mean, I feel this, of course, politically. I think half the country feels one way, half the country feels the other way, where it's like, how can that be popular? Like, how can that be popular, right? And I think that ultimately it's that you have to just accept. And once you accept that, like, I mean, maybe not so much politically, but art is different than politics because it has no moral consequence for anyone. Yeah. It's not hurting anyone. And I think that's another piece to it where it's like,
I watched a little bit of the Netflix has a Nickelback. Like, I think they made it.
Oh, sure.
But it's like, but it's their retelling, and they talk a lot about this, like how they're, what it was like to be really hated.
The most loved and hated band in the world.
And it's crazy. It's I think it's worth watching. Like to see their perspective of like, people like shouting at them from their cars, like you suck and stuff like that, and like, or whatever.
Yeah.
And you're
Have
like,
you heard that expression? Don't yuck someone else's yum.
Yeah.
I think that's it. Like as you get older, if that's not where you're going in the wrong direction. As a kid, you're trying to define yourself and figure out the world, and you have a lot of strong opinions. Like if you feel that way when you're 17, I'm not going to fault you. But if you're still like posting on message boards about shit you hate when you're out of your 20s, something is going wrong in your life and your priorities. You should be like, now I'm actually interested in things that I don't like that are popular because I want to know why. Like, what are they doing right? What have they figured out? Who is this audience that's being underserved? You should be thinking about it more from a place of curiosity than judgment.
100%. It's also like, it's fun to listen to these songs and know now with the context. Like, I think for me, it's come all the way back around. I held similar beliefs. Like, I definitely was swayed in the like, this is terrible. But now I think about it, I'm like, as a songwriter, I know that there's this thing, and I think like, hooks. It's like, you're talking about Max Martin. I know he's talked a lot about that. It's like, at the end of the day, like, unless you're making wildly improvisational avant-garde jazz, and even then maybe, like, at the core of the thing, the reason you think Nirvana is the coolest band is probably more circumstantial than it is like musical.
Yeah.
Like there are things in Western music is like relatively simple in terms of the formula of like, there's only so many notes, and there's really only so many notes that like work pleasingly together. You're getting a lot of like derivative chord structure and melody structure to the point where what's working for Nickelback has worked for a lot of people that you love.
Yeah.
You don't like the way it's being delivered or whatever, that's fine. Or the sort of maybe the lyrics or something, which is maybe all fair. But like ultimately when you're able to, like you said, to just step back and be like, it's a banger.
It's probably more similar to something you like than you would want to admit.
100%.
You just can't see it because of the context.
100%. And that's, context is very important, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, it's okay. It's probably an oversimplification, but I think the reality is like for when time passes and the context changes, I'm really able to see like, I mean, the proof is like, and I've heard even that like Spotify is putting more emphasis on this. This might be disinformation, but someone told me this. Like those guys, speaking of Nickelback, and so many of these bands that I think you could think of, went out and sold out arenas all over the world.
Yeah.
Like the sample size is to a point where it's like, people like this.
Yeah. You're wrong. It's like the humility of going like, if I don't like it and everyone else does, chances are I'm the one that's wrong. Like purely numerically, chances are sometimes you're the one who knew Kanye West was a piece of shit before everyone else, or R. Kelly was a piece of shit before everyone else. There's those things, but yeah, chances are if millions and millions of people like it, there's something good about it, and you're just being conceited or annoying or contrarian, and you should find what you do like about it, or just again pretend it doesn't exist, because there's lots of other stuff you can get into.
Yeah, 100%. I think about my brain just went like 5 different things, but I think about how like, ultimately those people are selling out arenas all over the world, and the sort of media around it is like, this is bad. There's really no other, maybe there's another art form I'm not thinking of, but like I always relate music to sports in that way, where it's like, it's kind of unfortunate because actually where I think music press, and it really happened in like, I call it like the pitchfork era, so to speak. It took this, maybe it's always been this way, but at least that's my coming of age around that sort of journalism. But like, it worked hard to work against what was actually happening and working oftentimes. It would, to say that it would like completely ignore acts like that to write about things, which I think in some ways is really cool and important to be like, hey, actually, this is what's better. Cool. Yeah. Even though they're playing in this really small room and they've been completely incapable of getting people to like this at any mass scale at any time, like, this is actually much cooler and people should like this, which, like, just because lots of people like something doesn't mean that another thing that isn't as liked isn't valuable. But I think ultimately when that's all that you do, when that's like the machine is just basically being like, oh, that thing's stupid because
just counter programming.
Yeah, and there's so much of that in music that I think, you know, and some of it's important. I really do believe that, but I think it basically says that, like, unless there's certain types of music that make it to that point, you know, like picturing like Bon Iver or something like that, where it's like he transcended that. He was both Pitchfork and Arena. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like he was and still is like, an incredible artist. But there's very few examples of things like that that have like made it as far as he's made it, both being critically acclaimed in the sort of like coolest of like beanie wearing circle, and also like you know, like my mom likes skinny, you know, older generations and people who are sort of like unaffected by that sort of media also like that music. I think it's super rare, but it doesn't take away from, you know, like our friend Noah Khan is having this like explosion, and it's changing because he's becoming this like, you know, culturally just mad star, right? But there was this period of time where like I felt like because I've seen it a little bit with us, and it's like the coverage was sort of like, this is happening. You know? Like,
no, there's like a nastiness to the music press that's not like, it's not, it has to distinguish itself from fandom, so it has to shit on certain things, and then it has to show that it has taste by liking obscure things. In publishing, it's the same thing. Like, the books that get reviewed in the New York Times are almost never the books on the New York Times list. And that's like very deliberate. Like, it's like they're talking about the important books, right? But the books that people are buying are not those books.
It's silly to me because I think what sports has done really well is they do the opposite. So like,
they believe they're supposed to make a product that people enjoy.
They cover the best teams.
Yes. Yeah.
Like if your team is like, or the worst, which is also equally interesting, but the middle gets no coverage, right? Because you know, just the sort of like team that's not making the playoffs, where they've won like 6 games, and like they don't put that game on Monday Night Football. Yeah. They put, you know, the 2 best teams. They try to cover the best. The best stories are the most successful teams. A great play is the most watched thing. Granted, it's not like 1-to-1 here, but like,
no, you're right.
I think therefore they have this really robust media environment because they're actually serving the mass of people who are most interested in the thing. Whereas I do think that music journalism actually shot itself in the foot for like a decade at least, and is maybe now just playing catch up, because it was like, well, if you only pump up that band that only 200 people care about, then the audience for this article is like significantly limited. Now they had their own.
The other thing about sports, for all the money, it's worth remembering that it's about as socialistic as you could get.
Sure.
It's all about creating parity.
Totally.
It's all about, everything is highly unionized.
Yep.
The profit sharing goes to everyone, including the worst people.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, oh, actually, when you create this kind of closed ecosystem that's designed to support the people in it and grow the whole thing at the same time, you get, like, you look at where sports was like 20 years ago now, 50 years ago now, just like everything is better in every way. People do things that were physically impossible not that long ago, because the whole system is about doing that.
Yeah, and everything works in lockstep to make the thing bigger all the time. From the media, the media is like, you know, they're so good to the media in terms of the coaches available. Like, sometimes now you've got like basketball guys, like it's like the ball's being dribbled past them. They're like, what did you think of that play? It's like, I don't know.
Yeah, they're all supporting the product, which is the experience of the fans.
We talk about that in terms of like how funny it would be if like you play a show and like, because their lives are so crazy. It's like you play a show and it's like, you know, big show in Austin, Texas, and you walk off stage and then you go into this little room. There's a light on you. They're like, what was that chord? And the third song there, it sounded like you might have played a bad chord.
Yeah, if you were covered in real time, what would that look like?
You're like, yeah, just didn't drink enough coffee today. You know, whatever.
There's just not any artist big enough. I mean, Taylor Swift's the only one who can do that.
There's a few.
You want to go check out some books?
Let's do it.